The moment the priest said those words, my world stopped. "I can't continue this ceremony," he said firmly. His eyes didn't look at me or my groom. They looked past us, to his mother. The guests went silent, their whispers dying in the air. The soft organ music that had filled the church faded into stillness. I could hear my heart thudding in my chest. I turned to look at my groom, Daniel, confused and afraid. He looked just as lost as I felt. Then the priest's voice cut through the silence again. "Ask her why." Every single head in that room turned toward Evelyn Carter, Daniel's mother. She sat perfectly still in the front row, hands clasped tightly around her purse, her face pale as porcelain. My father stood up behind me, his voice shaking. "What's going on?" The priest sighed heavily. "I can't marry these two until the truth is spoken." I looked at Daniel. His grip on my hand loosened. The priest's eyes lowered. I felt the ground shift beneath me, like the floor itself was warning me to run. What truth could possibly stop a wedding? What secret could make a priest interrupt a ceremony in front of everyone? Stay with me until the end, because what was revealed that day didn't just end a wedding. It changed the entire story of who I was. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. It helps me share more true stories like this one. My name is Grace Miller, and my wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I grew up in a small town with my dad, Frank, who raised me alone after my mom died when I was 7. He worked as a high school teacher, and though we didn't have much, he gave me everything that mattered: love, safety, and strength. 3 years ago, I met Daniel Carter at a charity event for local schools. He was confident, kind, and easy to talk to. He came from a well-known family, the kind of people who lived in houses with fountains and hosted Christmas parties that looked like magazine covers. I was just a teacher's daughter with a regular office job, but Daniel never made me feel small. He treated me like I belonged beside him, not beneath him. His mother, Evelyn, was polite from the beginning, but it was the kind of politeness that cut. She would compliment me and then twist it into something else. "You're such a lovely girl," she once said. "Daniel has always admired simple women. You bring balance." I used to laugh it off. I thought she'd warm up to me over time. When Daniel proposed, I said yes without a second thought. I believed love could conquer everything, even disapproval. We spent a year planning the wedding. Nothing extravagant, just elegant and personal. The morning of the ceremony, the sun poured through my window, soft and golden. I remember thinking, this is it. My life is about to begin. My bridesmaids were fussing over my hair while my dad sat quietly, watching me with tears in his eyes. "Your mother would have been so proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. That was all I needed to hear. I hugged him, trying not to cry. At the church, everything looked perfect. The white flowers, the soft music, the people I loved gathered in one place. Evelyn walked in, wearing an expensive navy blue gown and a pearl necklace, every inch the graceful matriarch. She kissed Daniel's cheek and gave me a faint smile. "You look lovely, dear. Let's hope today goes smoothly." I thought nothing of it then. When the ceremony began, Daniel took my hand. The priest smiled kindly at us, opening his book and beginning to read. My heart felt light. My cheeks hurt from smiling. For a moment, everything felt safe. Then the priest's expression changed. He frowned slightly, his eyes darting toward Evelyn. I noticed it instantly. His hands trembled as he turned the next page. The pause stretched long enough for people to start shifting in their seats. Then, with a voice that carried through the entire church, he said, "I can't continue this ceremony." Laughter rippled softly from a few guests who thought it was a mistake. But when the priest's voice deepened, everyone froze. "Before we move forward," he said, "there is something that must be revealed, something that Mrs. Carter must explain." The blood drained from my face. My fingers went cold. Daniel turned sharply toward his mother. "Mom?" he asked, his voice tight. Evelyn's face stayed calm, but her knuckles turned white as she gripped her purse. "Father," she said quietly, "this isn't the time." The priest shook his head. "This is the only time, Mrs. Carter. The truth cannot stay hidden any longer. I remember whispering to Daniel, "What is he talking about?" But he didn't answer. He just stared at his mother, his face pale and unreadable. Then the priest looked at me, right at me, and said, "Grace, before you take this man's hand, you deserve to know who he really is." A murmur spread through the room like a wave. My knees felt weak, and my heart began to pound so hard I thought I might faint. I could feel every pair of eyes in that church on us, waiting for what would come next. I didn't know it then, but the truth his mother was hiding would not only destroy my wedding, it would destroy the life I thought I had. For a long moment, no one spoke. The church, once filled with music and whispers of joy, fell into a silence so heavy that even breathing felt wrong. My hand was still in Daniel's, but his grip had loosened. The priest stood before us, his face grave, as if he carried a burden he didn't want, but had no choice but to reveal. My eyes darted between him and Evelyn, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, who sat motionless in the front pew, her lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Father, what are you talking about?" His voice cracked in confusion. The priest glanced at him, then back at Evelyn. "Your mother came to see me 2 weeks ago," he said slowly, his tone cautious but clear. "She shared something with me in confession that directly affects this marriage." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My heart dropped. My father stood from his seat, his protective instinct flaring. "A confession?" he said. "What could she possibly have to confess that stops a wedding?" Evelyn's voice was barely audible. "Please," she said softly. "Not here. Not like this." But the priest shook his head. "You left me no choice. The truth must be spoken before God. You know this." Daniel turned fully toward his mother, his expression a mix of confusion and dread. "Mom, what's he talking about? What truth?" Evelyn's hands trembled as she stood. Her pearls shimmered under the light as she took a shaky step forward. "Daniel, I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could let you be happy." I felt a lump in my throat. Let him be happy? With me? What does that mean? She looked at me with watery eyes. "Grace, I never wanted to hurt you." The priest's voice cut in again, gentle but firm. "Mrs. Carter, please, tell them." Evelyn took a deep breath, glancing at the priest before turning toward Daniel and me. "Years ago, before I married your father, I had a relationship with someone. It ended suddenly. I never told your father, and when I found out I was pregnant, I told everyone that Daniel was his." Daniel blinked in disbelief. "Wait, what are you saying?" My chest tightened. "Pregnant?" I whispered, my heart racing faster with every word she said. She nodded, tears spilling down her face now. "The man I was with was named Frank Miller." The name hit me like a slap. My father's name. I froze. "Frank Miller?" I repeated, my voice cracking. I turned to look at my dad. He was standing in the aisle now, pale, his jaw tight. Daniel's voice wavered. "What does she mean, Grace? Who's Frank Miller?" "He's my father," I said quietly, my throat tightening as the weight of the words sank in. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. A bridesmaid dropped her bouquet, the sound echoing sharply off the marble floor. Evelyn covered her mouth, sobbing. "I didn't know," she said between tears. "I didn't know you were his daughter. I didn't realize until the engagement. I wanted to tell you both, but I couldn't. I didn't want to ruin your lives." The priest's voice trembled as he added, "She came to me seeking forgiveness, torn between guilt and fear. I told her she must tell the truth before the wedding, but she hesitated. I can't perform this ceremony knowing what I know." Daniel staggered back a step as if he'd been struck. "You're saying Grace is my sister?" His voice broke on the word. Evelyn nodded, sobbing harder now. "Half-sister," she said weakly. "You share the same father." My vision blurred. I couldn't breathe. My knees buckled, and my father rushed to my side, gripping my shoulders to steady me. His face was ashen. "Grace," he said, his voice shaking. "I swear I had no idea. I didn't even know Evelyn had a child. I haven't seen her in almost 30 years. I stared at him, searching for something to hold on to, but the world felt like it was crumbling beneath me. The man I loved, the man I was about to marry, was my brother. Every memory we shared, our first date, Our first kiss, the promises we made, suddenly felt poisoned. Daniel's face went blank. He stared at the floor, then looked up at me, eyes full of pain and disbelief. "This can't be true," he whispered. "It can't." But the priest's solemn silence was the only answer we needed. The whispers in the church grew louder. Guests stood from their seats, some crying, others muttering in disbelief. My father stepped forward, his voice rising. "You should have told us," he shouted at Evelyn. "You could have stopped this before today." Evelyn clutched her chest, crying so hard she could barely speak. "I was afraid. I thought maybe it wasn't true. I told myself it couldn't be. But when I saw Grace's last name, I knew. I thought I could live with it. I thought maybe God would stop me if it was wrong." Daniel's face hardened, his voice low and broken. "He just did." Those words hung in the air like a sentence. Evelyn collapsed into a pew, sobbing uncontrollably. My father looked helpless, his hand still on my arm. The priest quietly closed his book, whispering, "I am truly sorry, my child." I looked around at the faces of everyone I loved. My family, my friends, people who had come to celebrate love, and all I saw was pity. My bouquet slipped from my hands and fell to the floor. The sound of the petals hitting the ground echoed in the silence, final and cruel. That was the moment I realized the ceremony wasn't just over. My entire life as I knew it was over. After that day, I thought my life would never move forward again. The wedding ended in chaos. People left the church whispering in shock, the sound of their voices following me as I stood frozen near the altar. The priest quietly walked away, and Evelyn was led outside by one of her relatives, still sobbing. Daniel stood motionless, his face pale and his eyes empty. When I tried to speak, he just shook his head and said, "I can't. Please, just don't." Then he walked out of the church without looking back. My father stayed beside me, trying to steady me as reporters and guests swarmed outside. But I couldn't hear anything clearly anymore. Every sound blended into a dull roar. The priest's words, "You share the same father," kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. In the days that followed, I refused to leave my apartment. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Friends called to check on me. Some offered sympathy, others wanted details, but I couldn't talk to anyone. I deleted every photo from the wedding folder on my laptop. I tore up the invitations still lying on the kitchen counter. The white dress hung in my closet, untouched, its fabric like a ghost haunting me. My father came every evening, bringing food I barely touched. Each time he'd say, "Grace, you have to eat something," and I'd nod just to make him stop worrying. But the truth was, I didn't feel hunger or pain. I felt nothing. It was as if someone had emptied me from the inside. On the 5th day, my father came again, this time with something in his hand. It was an old photograph, yellowed at the corners. "This was taken 30 years ago," he said quietly, placing it on the table. I picked it up and froze. There was my father, young, smiling with a woman beside him, Evelyn. They were standing in front of an old cafe, holding coffee cups and laughing like they had no idea the future would bring so much pain. I looked up at him, my throat dry. "So it's true," I whispered. He nodded, guilt heavy in his voice. "Yes, but Grace, I swear to you, I didn't know she was pregnant when we ended things. Her family moved away, and I never saw her again until Daniel brought her to dinner that first time. I recognized her, but I convinced myself it was impossible. I told myself it had to be someone else. I was a fool. I wanted to be angry with him, to scream, to throw something, but all I could do was stare at the photo. She knew, I said softly. She knew who I was, and still let this happen." He nodded sadly. "I think she hoped it wasn't true, or she thought she could hide it forever." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker. My entire life felt like a lie. The man I loved wasn't just gone. He was forbidden to me in the cruelest way possible. And yet, beneath all that pain, a small part of me needed closure. I needed to hear it from Evelyn herself. The next morning, I drove to the Carter estate. The house looked as perfect as ever, with its trimmed hedges and white columns, but the air felt heavy. Evelyn opened the door herself, her eyes swollen and red. She didn't look like the proud, composed woman I remembered. She looked broken. "Grace," she said, her voice trembling, "you shouldn't have come." "I had to," I said firmly. "You owe me the truth. All of it." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. The house was silent. Family photos lined the hallway, including one of Daniel as a child, smiling, innocent, unaware of the web of secrets surrounding him. We sat in the living room. Evelyn clasped her hands tightly. "I was young," she began. "Your father and it wasn't supposed to happen that way. I loved him, but my parents wanted me to marry someone else. They said he wasn't good enough for our family. I left him without saying goodbye." I clenched my fists. "And you never told him you were pregnant?" Tears filled her eyes. "I couldn't. I married someone else within months. My husband believed Daniel was his child. I told myself it was for the best. I wanted Daniel to grow up with everything I couldn't have." I shook my head. "You let your son fall in love with me. You let us plan a life together. You let us stand at that altar." She broke down, covering her face. "I tried to stop it, Grace. When Daniel introduced you, I thought my heart would stop. At first, I wasn't sure, but then I saw your father at our engagement dinner, and I knew. I wanted to tell you that night, but every time I opened my mouth, I froze. I kept hoping the truth would somehow stay buried." "Buried?" I said bitterly. "You buried my happiness, his future, and your own integrity. For what? So your reputation wouldn't suffer?" Evelyn looked at me with hollow eyes. "You're right. I don't expect forgiveness. I've already lost my son. He won't speak to me." I stood up, feeling tears sting my eyes. "You didn't just lose your son," I said. "You lost the chance to make things right when it mattered." As I walked toward the door, she whispered, "Grace, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I truly am. I prayed for years that this day would never come." I stopped and turned slightly. "Maybe it was never about what you prayed for," I said quietly. "Maybe it was about what you hid." Outside, the air was cold, but I could breathe again. For the first time since that day, I felt something other than grief. I felt strength. I couldn't change what happened, but I could choose what came next. I drove away knowing that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but I also knew one thing. This secret no longer owned me. I was free to build a new story, one that wasn't built on lies. When I left Evelyn's house that day, I thought I was finally done with the past, that facing her would bring me closure. But I was wrong. Closure doesn't come from walking away. It comes from understanding. And there were still too many questions I didn't have answers to, questions only Daniel could give me. For weeks after the wedding, I avoided the world. My job granted me leave, friends stopped calling, and I deleted social media to escape the endless gossip. The story had spread everywhere. Bride and groom discovered their half-siblings at the altar. It sounded like something torn out of a tragic novel, not my life. I had to stop reading the comments before they broke what was left of me. Some pitied me, others mocked the situation. But the only person I wanted to hear from stayed silent. Daniel. He hadn't called, texted, or written since he walked out of that church. I told myself he was grieving too, but the silence hurt. I didn't know if he hated me, or if he just couldn't face the truth any more than I could. Either way, we were both living ghosts, trapped in a story neither of us asked for. Then, one evening, almost 2 months after that day, there was a knock on my door. My heart jumped before my mind could even process why. When I opened it, Daniel stood there. He looked different, thinner, exhausted, the light gone from his eyes. "Grace," he said softly, "can I come in?" For a second, I just stared at him. My chest tightened. I didn't know if I wanted to hug him or slam the door, but I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around like everything in my apartment was too fragile to touch. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, silence thick between us. Finally, I broke it. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I didn't think I could," he admitted. His voice was low, broken. Every time I tried, I felt sick. I kept thinking about all the things we said to each other, everything we planned. It's like my brain can't separate what we were from what we are now. I nodded, tears already stinging my eyes. "I know. It's the same for me." He looked down at his hands. "I had to see you, though. Because I need you to know something." "What?" He took a deep breath. "You didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault. You loved me honestly. You trusted me honestly. And if there's one thing I hate most about all this, it's that it took something pure and made it into something shameful. You don't deserve that." The words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until they were out of his mouth. He continued, "I spent weeks being angry. At my mother, at your father, even at God. But then I realized none of them changed what I felt for you. I still care about you, Grace. I just don't know what to do with that." I looked at him through tears. "Neither do I. You were the person I thought I'd build my life with. Now you're the person I have to mourn while you're still alive." He winced at that. "I know." We sat in silence again, the kind that carried everything words couldn't hold. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "My mother gave me this," he said. "She wanted me to show you." I hesitated before taking it. Inside was a folded letter, written in Evelyn's neat handwriting. I started reading aloud. "Grace, I know you may never forgive me, and I understand that, but I need you to know I didn't keep this secret to hurt you. I kept it because I was ashamed of who I used to be, of the choices I made, and of the pain I caused. When Daniel introduced you, I saw your mother's kindness in your eyes and Frank's strength in your smile. I knew the truth, and it terrified me. I wanted to believe fate wouldn't be so cruel. I wanted to believe I could keep my son happy without destroying you, but the truth always finds its way out. I'm sorry for everything it cost you." By the time I finished, my tears were falling freely. I handed the letter back to Daniel. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the floor. "Finally," I whispered, "do you forgive her?" He took a long moment before answering. "I don't know if I can, but I think I have to try, because holding on to hate won't undo what happened. And maybe forgiveness is the only way for either of us to start over." I nodded, understanding what he meant. Forgiveness wasn't about approval. It was about letting go of the weight. When he stood to leave, I followed him to the door. Neither of us knew how to say goodbye. He looked at me one last time and said softly, "Maybe in another life, Grace." I smiled through the ache. Maybe in another life. He walked away, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel anger or heartbreak. I just felt peace. Because in that moment, I realized love doesn't vanish. It transforms. Ours had turned into something quieter, something bittersweet. A week later, I went to visit my mother's grave for the first time since the wedding. I told her everything, from the joy to the pain to the truth. As I placed flowers on her stone, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Maybe life had taken away the love I dreamed of, but it gave me something else. The strength to face truth, no matter how devastating it was. As I walked away from the graveyard, I knew I was ready to live again. Not as the woman who almost married her half-brother, but as the woman who survived it and found herself in the ruins. Time doesn't heal everything, but it teaches you how to live with what can't be changed. The months after that day were the hardest I've ever known. Every morning I woke up expecting to feel whole again, and every night I went to bed realizing that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to live with the truth. The wedding that never happened became something people in town still whispered about, but I stopped caring. Pain had stripped me of everything superficial. What remained was something deeper, clarity, strength, and a fragile kind of peace that only comes after you've survived heartbreak that nearly broke your soul. I moved into a small apartment by the coast a few months later. The air there felt cleaner, like it hadn't been touched by all the memories I was trying to escape. I started working at a local youth center, helping young girls with their studies and confidence. Every time I saw one of them smile after finally understanding a lesson or conquering a fear, I saw a piece of my younger self, the girl who believed life was simple and love was always pure. It reminded me that innocence isn't weakness. It's what gives us hope. My father visited often. His guilt lingered, though I told him countless times he had nothing to be sorry for. "You didn't know, Dad," I'd say. "You couldn't have." But every now and then I'd catch him staring out at the sea, his eyes distant, as if he was reliving every moment that led us to that church. One day, he said quietly, "Grace, Sometimes life doesn't give us the chance to fix the past. All we can do is love better in the future. That sentence stayed with me. Evelyn wrote me a letter a few months later. She said she'd started therapy and was attending church again, not to hide behind faith, but to find the courage to face what she'd done. I spent my whole life caring about appearances, she wrote. I thought protecting my son's reputation mattered more than protecting the truth. I see now how wrong I was. I hope one day, when you think of me, it's not with hatred, but with pity for the woman who lived her life in fear. I didn't reply, but I didn't tear up the letter either. I kept it folded in my drawer, as a reminder that even those who destroy can be broken too. As for Daniel, I didn't see him again for almost a year. One morning, while grabbing coffee before work, I turned around and there he was. His hair was shorter and his smile was softer, the kind that came from acceptance rather than joy. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You look happy." I smiled and told him, "I am." We talked for a few minutes. Nothing deep, just small pieces of ordinary life. He told me he had started his own architecture firm in another city, focusing on rebuilding old community spaces. "It feels good to restore something," he said. I understood the unspoken meaning behind those words. Both of us were trying to rebuild what life had broken. When we said goodbye, there was no sadness left between us, just gratitude. Some people enter your life to stay, others to teach you something before they leave. Daniel had taught me both love and loss, and I carried both with grace. Over time, the story that once defined me became something I rarely spoke about. It wasn't shame anymore. It was history. When I looked back, I didn't see a ruined wedding or a scandal. I saw a woman who walked through fire and came out stronger. I learned that truth doesn't destroy love. It reveals what kind of love was real to begin with. What Daniel and I had was real, but it wasn't meant to last. Some stories aren't meant to end in forever. They're meant to end in understanding. One evening, nearly 2 years after everything happened, I found myself sitting on the beach at sunset. The horizon stretched endlessly, the sky painted with soft pink and gold streaks. The waves moved in gentle rhythm, and for the first time, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about everything I'd gained: strength, resilience, faith in myself. I whispered a quiet prayer, not for what was, but for what was still possible. I realized that day that life isn't about the perfect picture we plan in our heads. It's about the unexpected moments that test us, the heartbreaks that humble us, and the choices that rebuild us. I learned to stop asking why me and started asking what now, because every ending, no matter how cruel, carries within it the beginning of something new. Before I left the beach, I wrote one last line in my journal, a promise to myself. I can't change where I came from, but I can choose where I go next. And that's exactly what I did. If there's one lesson my story taught me, it's that truth, no matter how painful, is never your enemy. Lies rot slowly, but truth, even when it breaks you, clears the path for healing. You can't rebuild on deception. You can only rebuild on honesty, no matter how cracked the foundation may be. Now, when people ask if I believe in love, I smile and say yes, because love isn't what destroyed me. It's what gave me the courage to survive. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more true stories like this, and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and know that you stayed till the very end, because sometimes the endings are where we finally find our beginnings.